All right, so I am here to just give a little rundown on the Arizona High School Jamboree. I was able to catch the event this past weekend from the 18th to the 19th of October. Watched a lot of really good basketball, and so kind of just wanted to give my thoughts on the overall event. Kind of just talk about some different teams, different players. Um, Hopefully not keep this too long, but honestly, just kind of wanted to give a quick rundown of everything. So we'll kind of start off honestly with just general thoughts on the event, the venue, just overall um, game wise. So I guess just to first, say, thank you to whoever put this event together. It was really good atmosphere, really good spot. Honestly, the Arizona Athletic Grounds in Mesa, just a great place to play a lot of high school basketball games. I mean, you got 16 courts in there. Obviously, it wasn't nearly as loud and as raucous as Section 7 because I think 15 of the 16 courts were being used. However, it was a little bit nice with this event just because everything was basically being played on the right side of the gym, and so I think max there were maybe 6 or 7 games that were being played all at once. So it made it pretty easy to traverse and get from game to game. In Section 7 back in June, it was, if I wanted to get from court 1 to court 16, I'd have to, basically walk 3 to 5 minutes just to get over it and watch that game, and then I'd miss out on some action. Whereas here, if I wanted to get from court 1 to court 4, I'd be able to get there in less than a minute, and so it was pretty easy to watch a lot of the games. So again, really good spot to hold basketball games. It wasn't super crowded. The crowd was good, but it wasn't overwhelming. There was definitely a lot of area to walk around. I mean, from a bracket matchup perspective, I thought overall it was pretty well drawn. Particularly the top bracket, the main one. I think it was called the JU bracket. I thought there were a lot of really good matchups. I thought there were some pretty fair games in there. And overall, like the two teams that were supposed to make it to the final in the top bracket, Millennium and Basha, they made it. So that was kind of to be expected. I think the lower part of the bracket, a tad bit more parity. Definitely a lot more blowouts, less memorable games in that. If I'm being quite honest, at this event, I was watching a lot of the teams from the top bracket, so I didn't spend too much time watching these. Overall, though, I do think the two best teams in that bottom bracket did make it to the championship with Centennial. I guess you could argue Santan and Hamilton. Those would probably be the second and third best teams in that bottom bracket. But overall, like two of the top three teams in that bottom bracket made it. And so, yeah, the games were pretty good. Overall, I think going to this event, it provided a lot of general, good insight into who's going to be pretty good this year. I'd say definitely showing who potential contenders are in each of the respective conferences. So definitely provide a little bit of clarity. Really, the only complaint I have with the event, it's a minor one, but for some reason, court 2 wasn't being used, and then in between court 2 and court 3, about, I don't know, 30 minutes into the event on day 1 on Saturday, a DJ came up and just started blasting music, and so there's basically music going on throughout the entire event, which I thought was kind of annoying. It kind of ruined a little bit of the ambiance with the games. Sometimes it's just good to just hear the crowd, the players talk to each other, and all the whistles all going on at once. And so it was really weird being on court 3. And I feel like if I was a player, I wouldn't even be able to communicate very well because there's just music blasting in my ears. So I mean, that's the only thing. But other than that, I thought it was a really good event. Yeah, so we'll kind of talk about a few different things in this review of the Jamboree. We'll kind of just talk about the winners of both brackets at the top. So Millennium winning the top bracket, Centennial winning the bottom bracket there. Overall, yeah, I think it's pretty clear that Millennium is the best team in the state. I mean, Sunny Slope fans are going to come at me if I say that, but legitimately, from everything I've seen so far, I'd say there's a top tier. It's Millennium and Sunny Slope are kind of been together, but Millennium, I think they've gotten better from a talent perspective, whereas Sunny Slope has probably stayed the same, gotten slightly worse because they did lose Cade Snyder after he transferred. But I mean, this isn't a knock on Sunny Slope, but I'm just saying Millennium looks really good. Aiden Diggs is just phenomenal. I think maybe he scored like 30 points in the championship game against Basha. So I mean that starting lineup, Diggs, Cam Holmes, Trey McKinney, DJ Spencer is like really talented, really underrated, I feel like, in that lineup. And then Adrian Higuera, another starting guard. So they're just really tough to beat. Basha kept it close, I'd say, for the first quarter and a half in that championship game. And then Millennium they just rolled. So really impressive showing from them. Really, they dominated basically every game, with the only exception being the semifinal against Highland, which was actually very competitive. However, three of Millennium starters actually weren't playing in that game. So Diggs, Holmes, and Higuera ended up missing that game. So it ended up being a really, really tight game with McKinney and DJ Spencer really carrying the load. Probably one of the more entertaining games of the tournament, actually. But I think it was tied maybe with, I'd say, 2 minutes left. Spencer hit a big three. McKinney closed it out with the jam toward the end there. So a little bit of a scare, honestly. I'm really glad that they actually got the job done, because I would have been ashamed to not been able to watch them play again throughout the rest of the tournament. But yeah, Millennium, I'd say for me personally, definitely the best team in the state. We'll kind of see how things pan out. They're going to play Sunny Slope twice this year in the region, and then who knows, possibly a third time in the championship. So I guess we'll see once the season starts. Now, I guess jumping down to the bottom half of the bracket, Centennial closed out, quite honestly, a really impressive tournament. I didn't really know anything about this team, if I'm being quite honest, until Section 7. So I went to Section 7 in June, and I watched Centennial play like the first day or two, and I was like, wow, this team's like really good. Johnny Rios was a name I came to know, and he's one of the more talented guards I've seen play, especially this past weekend. Definitely the leader of that crew. And Centennial is an interesting team because they're not particularly tall, so it's basically like 5 guards playing. They kind of remind me of Florida Atlantic when they made the Final Four a couple years back. They were basically just like 4 guards in a center. That's kind of the style of play that Centennial has, and so it makes for a really fun and enjoyable offense. So honestly, an absolute joy to watch. They kind of had a bit of a scare in their first 2 games of the tournament, because I think they were down by 10 at one point to Williamsfield in the first game, and then they actually came back and won. So I actually watched the tail end of that, and then I think they were also down maybe double digits against Red Mountain in the second round, and then they came back and won by 21 points, and then they rolled Hamilton, which honestly I was kind of surprised with. I thought Hamilton would put up more of a fight, and then that set up a really enticing matchup between Santan, who's arguably the best 2A team in the state there, and then Centennial. And I thought the game was going to be pretty competitive, but honestly, Centennial just came out roaring, and they just looked really good, man. So, I mean, there's one thing I've taken from this event. I'd say Centennial is I started the event thinking they're a sleeper contender to win 5A. I'd say they're definitely just an outright clear contender to contest for 5A. I think when it comes to beating team, I think they could beat Willow Canyon, Ironwood, Mountain Point, Carl Hayden. I think they could beat any of those teams. Central would obviously be a dogfight. That would be the team that everyone would have to get past. But legitimately, Centennial looks really good, and I think they're gonna have a really good season. So I'm really looking forward to watching them play this year. So I'll be sure to try and get out and watch them play a few times there. But yeah, so again, overall, the winners of the brackets were deserving. I think it was clear the 2 best teams, in each bracket, or the best team in each bracket won. So that was good to see there. So I guess just kind of a quick overview of each round. I'm kind of just gonna skim the brackets, go game by game, and then kind of just go over a quick synopsis of the ones I did watch. Obviously, with most of the time 5 to 6 games being played at once, it was kind of impossible to watch a whole game in its entirety. So kind of just going to roll through and talk about what I did see from a lot of these games. Again, the top bracket was a lot of the better teams. So those are the ones I tended to watch the most. So nothing too crazy there. I mean, again, Millennium rolled Chandler. The Central versus Liberty game in the first round was very entertaining. It was probably a top 5 game of the tournament, back and forth. I mean, I think throughout the entire game, the lead for either team may not have been more than 6 points. So really, really fun to watch. Liberty, they got a pretty good ball club out there in the West Valley. Toward the end, though, John Mattingly on Central, he came to play. I think they were down maybe 6 points with a couple minutes to go. Mattingly, I think the final 5 possessions, scored 11 points. So hits a 3, comes back, hits a 3, ties it up with like a minute left. I think he hit a couple step back 2s to take a lead, and then went 1 for 2 from the line. So Mattingly basically carried the team in that one, and that was really fun. So yeah, I think Central, they're while we're on the topic of Central, they look really good. They've kind of reloaded. They've got another transfer in from St. Mary's, I believe, John Ferendorf. A lot of the same cast, Dom Rojas, scrappy little guard, really good on defense. He was actually getting a lot of ISO work too, and he looked pretty good. And then John's brother Grant looked also pretty solid there too. So I think Central is probably the clear top team in 5A. Yeah, Mesa, Castile, didn't really watch that one too much, but it looks like Mesa handled them. Highland, Willow Canyon, watched that one a little bit. Was never really close. Highland had control of that one from the start there. Perry, Sandra Day O'Connor was one I was interested in to start the round. I think both teams are pretty, equal, honestly, but Perry was able to pull it off. LJ Diamond looks really good. So he was fun to watch. Also, Victor Babbage. That team's really entertaining. I'd say by far probably the best game of the first round. Definitely one of the best games of the tournament. Deer Valley versus Mountain Point. That game came down to the wire. Deer Valley was down a couple points in the final minute. Tied up off a 3. I forgot who the player was that got fouled on Mountain Point, but someone got fouled with like 3 or 4 seconds. Hit some free throws, and then Deer Valley, 3 or 4 seconds left, comes down. I believe it was Micah Andrews, comes down and hits a game-winning 3 to knock him out. So really, really entertaining there. Yeah, and so that was the first round there for the top bracket. Really, I'm not going to go over too much in the bottom bracket just because, like I said, a lot of the games were kind of blowouts. Nothing really notable there. The only exception being Valley Christian and Gilbert really were in a tight one. I think Gilbert, they barely eked that one out. They scored with maybe 3 or 4 seconds left to take the lead after basically trailing the entire time, and they got that win there. But other than that, nothing really notable on that bracket in terms of games, and for the ones that I watched there. I guess going back to the top bracket, though, other games that were pretty interesting. Watched a tad bit of Highland and Mesa. Again, I didn't really get to watch Mesa as much as I would have liked, but Highland pulled that one out. Higley versus Perry in the second round was also a pretty entertaining game there. It was really close through the first 3 quarters, and then Higley, I mean, they're just really talented. They probably, on paper, from a individual player perspective, have a top 5 roster in the state. So they clearly just, that showed out, and they just pulled away toward the end there. So that was a good game. Really kind of just like looking over here at these other games, nothing too crazy. Willow Canyon was in a few dogfights, eked out some wins, or a win against Chandler, which I'm pretty bullish on Chandler this year. And then Sandra Day O'Connor took them out in the consolation bracket there. They look pretty solid too, but pretty good games there. In the semifinals, I already talked about that Millennium Highland game, so pretty competitive there. But yeah, so kind of just a quick rundown of some of those games. Really, I'll talk about a few of my favorite games. Deer Valley, they're a team I'm going to talk about here more in a second, but they were really entertaining to watch. I think the number 1 game of the week or the weekend was probably Deer Valley versus Perry. It went to quadruple overtime. You could tell every single player was gassed, putting it all on the line. And then I think what happened was in quadruple overtime, they changed it to where basically just first person to score a basket wins. And so, Perry came down. I think it was LJ Diamond that got the game winning bucket. But in reality, like no team deserved that to lose that game. Like if there was ever a moment to give a tie out between two teams, that would have been the one. In all reality, too, or in all honesty, winner of that was the final game of the tournament for both those teams. So it's not like winning that game would have sent them either team to the championship or anything. But that game, very entertaining. Deer Valley honestly just put on the show the entire tournament there, so that was really good. Deer Valley versus Mountain Point, again, I'd say that was like the second best game. Millennium versus Highland was the third. Kind of talked about Central Liberty, and then Higley Perry. Those were probably like the top 5 games that I personally watched there. Again, was mostly focusing on that top bracket there. Now, as far as most impressive teams, again, I've kind of gone on about it, but Deer Valley, Centennial, Higley with an honorable mention. I thought those were probably, for me personally, 3 most impressive teams. Deer Valley by far was just, they kind of wowed me because they were actually playing without 3 of their starters. I believe it was Simon Gonzalez who was actually hurt. I didn't really talk to any of the players or anything like that, but from what I saw, it looked like maybe a broken arm or something like that, and he was on the bench, so he wasn't playing. And then I think another one of their starting guards was also hurt. I think one of their starting power forwards or centers wasn't playing either. So Deer Valley was basically playing multiple men down, and they were still competing, against the top of the top there. So looked really good. Again, beat out Mountain Point, a close one. He was playing Basha pretty competitively. They only lost by 8 points, and then arguably probably should have beaten Perry, down 3 guys. So just a really, really good roster, honestly. Sergio Gonzalez, again, one of the twins on that team, just an absolute stud. One guy that really showed out was Micah Andrews. I wasn't really too familiar with his game, but I was watching him a lot in that Perry game. Was kind of just getting everything at the basket, driving to the rim, hit a few step back threes. So looked really good. Elias Riley, another one of their guards. He's pretty solid. So Deer Valley is, if it wasn't for St. Mary's, Deer Valley would be the number 1 team in 4A. They just look really good. I love watching them play. They're just a grinded out, super tough team, very offensively and defensively sound. Everything you could ask for if you're a coach. And so it doesn't even matter if they're playing. You could be watching them play against eighth graders for all I care. They just play really good fundamental basketball, and they're absolutely fun to watch. So I think because of that, realistically, they could probably beat most 6A teams, and they're better than being in 4A. So by far the most impressive team. I loved watching them. Centennial, I talked about them at the start, but they're really good 5A team, so I'm not going to touch on them for too much longer. And then Higley, I'm throwing them my honorable mention just because, got to take a peek at them at Section 7 when they just brought in all their new talent. This is basically a completely overhauled roster with really the main guy being Noah Glore, the senior. Other than that, the entire starting lineup is different. You got Isaiah Ryder, Marquise Pless, 2 of the top freshmen incoming in the state starting. And then 2 transfers, Mike McIntyre from Williamsfield and Andre Tyler out from Illinois transferring over. So again, completely different roster. You could tell when they were playing at Section 7, still taking some time to gel, because I think arguably that was probably a lot of their first times playing with each other. So you can tell they've gotten a lot better since Section 7. Still, I think they're going to have a lot of the season left to work with each other, and I think eventually develop into a top 5 team in the state. I really think they're arguably top 10, and they have room to grow there. But really good. Andre Tyler is kind of just a spark plug. He's a menace on defense. Offensively too, he's pretty solid. I'd say he's a very emotional player. He definitely, fires up the team, and he'll let an opponent know, when he's, you know, he'll get in his face basically, I guess to say the least, when he's, um, kind of going off and playing well. Isaiah Ryder does not play like a freshman. He's really talented. Same thing with Marquise Pless. McIntyre, honestly, is just a really good player on defense. Noah Glore, spot up 3-point shooter. The guy hits everything. So really talented team. Again, I think they're going to develop a lot throughout the year and look really good there. So yeah, those are probably my most impressive teams there. And yeah, I guess just overall, if I had to create rough rankings, obviously, I still need to collect a little bit more data, watch a few more games, to, feel confident about, my rankings here going into the season. A lot of this can change. This is pretty fluid, but I'd say, again, there's a pretty clear tier 1 with Millennium and Sunny Slope. I'd say 3 and 4 is Basha and St. Mary's. I put them into like their own tier. And then really from like 5 to 10, I'd say this is like an area where I could realistically see all of these teams beating one another. So like Highland, Higley, Central, Brophy, who actually wasn't at the event, Mesa, who was actually missing Kai Miles, and I think Dejon Grayson. And then Deer Valley, I'd round out at 10, if I'm being honest. So that's kind of where I have it. I'd say, yeah, like 5A, Central is probably the clear-cut best team there. 4A, it's St. Mary's, and then Deer Valley's going to be down there. But really, I think there's a lot of movement. Highland, Higley, Central, Brophy, Mesa, Deer Valley, like there's a lot of movement that can be had there in terms of teams that are just on the outside looking in. For me, I thought Perry looked good. I really wouldn't, be opposed to putting him in there. Sandra Day, they're pretty well-rounded. Colton Watson wasn't playing either, so they were down a man. Liberty, they're, pretty solid. I think Trevin Davis, he's an incoming freshman, looked pretty raw, honestly, but, give him time to develop. And, hopefully he becomes a pretty key contributor to that offense. So I think that's where things kind of stand there. As far as like 5A and 4A teams to keep an eye on, mentioned Centennial, but, you can't forget about Willow Canyon and Ironwood. Ironwood, wasn't playing at this event, so not really too much to take away from them there. Arcadia also wasn't playing at this event, but they're bringing in a top freshman in the state. I think his name is Jacoby Thompson. So they're going to be playing at the AZ Preps Fall Showcase next week. So we'll keep an eye on them there. But like I said, this is where my ranking stands so far. You can come at me if you want, if you don't agree with any of these. By all means, this is an open forum. So if you disagree with me, no worries. Again, there's a lot to digest in high school basketball. It's an interesting sport just because, just across the nation, it's not going to be covered like college or NFL or NBA. So it's tough to get a good pulse realistically on how good teams are, especially when the data is limited with everything that's on Max Preps, and a lot of teams don't keep stats. So a lot of it kind of does come down to eye test. So like I said, this could change a lot here. But yeah, again, overall, really good event. Was really fun. Attended it with my brother, so was fun to kind of just walk around and watch some games and talk to a few folks and see some good players out there. But yeah, as far as looking ahead to next week, I'll actually be back out there for the AZ Preps Fall Showcase. I think that's being played out in Gilbert. I don't know if I think it's like at least 48 teams are going to be there. I think it's like a 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. slate there on Saturday, so it's going to be a long day. Pack a sack lunch, bring some Capri Suns, get ready to roll for that one. But I'll be there to watch some more games. So looking forward to kind of just seeing additional matchups and getting more insight on some of these teams that I talked about today. Some of the ones that I may not have talked about. Again, Arcadia and St. Mary's are going to be there, so I'm looking forward really to watching some of those teams. Phoenix Christian, I graduated from there, so I'm a little bit biased in that. I kind of want to see what they look like there. But again, a lot of basketball left to still view here before the season starts. I believe opening tip-off is like November 18th, November 19th. So yeah, just a little bit under a month till that season starts. So really exciting stuff here, and kind of just getting these these last few moments to watch some preseason games, some preseason action before we get rolling. But yeah, that's really everything I got here. If I didn't happen to mention your team, I'm sorry. There was a lot to go through. If you, I don't know, I don't really have a huge fan base, so this is something I think eventually I'll try to, maybe pump out more podcasts or more short-term content. So if anyone is interested in more insight on kind of like my thoughts and opinions and what I've seen, let me know. I'd be more than happy to do some form of a podcast, maybe do smaller like team like previews and stuff like that. If there's anyone you're interested, I think I might end up typing out some of my thoughts too on players and teams from this week and just everything I'm going to see in the future. So may start some sort of like Substack or blog. That way, for those folks who kind of prefer reading over video content or podcasts can take a look at that. But yeah, I mean, obviously, yeah, let me know what you think here. But yeah, I'll be sure to send updates throughout my Twitter on, kind of my thoughts and what I think. And then, yeah, we'll be back at it again next week for the AZ Preps Fall Showcase. So going to be a good time. And yeah, I'm looking forward to the season. But yeah, thanks again for taking the time to listen, everyone. Appreciate it. And yeah, have a good night.